So this video's topic is about how do you migrate your WordPress backend server from the local host or the server it's running on to RDS or to something more production ready. And why would you do that? So if you have a small hobby blog or something that's not really receiving much traffic, you probably don't need to do this. Having MySQL running on your local box is just fine. But if you're a business and you require certain levels of production or availability, then this is a good idea. Moving your database to Amazon RDS gives you automated backups, a very high level of performance, and also gives you the ability to scale. If you ever decide you need to auto-scale your EC2 instances from just a single instance, this will actually be a necessity so that each EC2 instance has access to the database. You'll also find if you're in a position where you're managing lots of WordPress instances, centralizing all the databases in RDS will make your management life a lot easier. WordPress, of course, uses MySQL, the M in the LAMP stack, and RDS does support MySQL, but it also has Aurora available. Aurora is Amazon's souped up MySQL database that runs much faster, is 100% compatible, but it's also more expensive. So you have to trade off if that's something that you want to do. In either case, this video will show you the steps needed to migrate your database from the local server to one of those types of database in RDS. So let's get started. Over in my EC2 console, I've already set up a WordPress server just for this exercise. If I go to this IP address, you can see that's the back end of WordPress. And this is what it looks like. Nothing too exciting, but that's the active WordPress server. So let's log into that box and see what we need to do next. WordPress stores its configuration in a file called wp-config. You'll need this information to be able to complete the migration. These are the three pieces of information you need: the database name, the user, and the password. In this case, we just have some dummy values. Once you have these values copied down somewhere, in our case, Notepad, we can exit out of this file. Step one is to take a dump of the current database using MySQL dump, and that's very straightforward. And you can see here we now have the WordPress.SQL file that is the database dump for that database. So that part is very easy. The next step is to go to RDS and figure out whether you want to use MySQL or Aurora. Make sure that when you're doing this, the RDS region matches the EC2 region, or you'll find that the latency in connecting between the two makes the WordPress server very slow. In this case, we're in Northern California, so RDS is available in the same region. I'm going to set up a MySQL database, but Aurora, the only real difference in the setup is the option that you select here. And I'm going to select dev and test just because it's a simple demo. Again, in a business context, you may well want to consider setting up a production MySQL environment with a multi-AZ deployment. The next window, you really want to look at these options fairly carefully because it defaults to some large instances, which can result in some fairly large monthly costs. We're just going to use a tiny instance for this example, although for production use you might well want to go for small at very least, or medium. Once you hit create, it's going to take a few minutes just to set up that RDS instance, but once it's done we'll come back to this screen. Okay, so RDS is now finished creating that database. So if we go back to our instance, we now need to connect using MySQL to the remote database. This time you'll have to add a hostname parameter, which you can find here. The endpoint for your database will appear on that first connectivity tab, and we just paste that in. Now what you'll find is it times out. You're not able to connect to the database. So what did we do wrong? Well, when you first create the RDS instance, you need to modify the security groups to enable your EC2 instance to access the RDS instance. And that's easy enough. So from the security group here, we just hit edit. I'm going to add a rule for MySQL Aurora for Launch Wizard 3. I know that's Launch Wizard 3 because when I went back to my instance, the security group for that EC2 instance was Launch Wizard 3. Now if I try this again, you can see I can now successfully connect to the remote database. So now I'm connected to the remote database. I want to create the same user and database that I had in the local schema. So I've got my details of my notepad file on the left here. First I'm going to create the user. And next I'll create the database. Now we've created the database inside RDS, we're going to import the data from our local database. The next step is to import our database dump into the remote database using this command. If it's successful, you won't get any feedback beyond the command prompt, but you want to make sure there are no errors at this stage. The final step of this is to go back to your WP config file and make sure that the settings are updated there. The critical entry to change here is the DB host, which is no longer the local host, but the RDS endpoint that we used earlier. The changes we make will be immediate, so going back to our website, pressing F5, if everything works, you should see the same website. If you see error cannot connect to database, then there was likely a typo in your configuration. It may not be immediately obvious that you've switched from one database to the other because the contents are identical, but just to prove it, I'm going to uninstall MySQL from this local server. Here we've stopped the MySQL service locally, but if we go back to the website, you'll see that it still works, showing that it's using the remote database. Just to prove this categorically, we'll remove the entire package from the server, and you can see that everything is still working just fine. So what did we do here? Well, we took a WordPress installation that's running on an EC2 instance that was a full LAMP stack, including MySQL running on the same box, and we exported the database from that MySQL server and imported it to a brand new RDS instance. So now there's no longer MySQL running on this box. So that's it for this video. If you have any questions for me, send them on Twitter to @JBESW or drop them in the comments in this video. And if you enjoy this channel, don't forget to subscribe.